The world is getting crazier. People are acting more and more insane. The end of the world is tomorrow. Tomorrow. There's only one thing to do when the world is falling apart. Listen to Basil and Gonz as they discuss this week's news and events through the lens of Bible prophecy. You are listening to CanaryCry News Talk.
You're listening to Canary Cry News Talk. Today is October 22nd, 2021. This is a very special episode, The Shoulders of Giants, remembering Russ Dizdar and Rob Skiba. And razzle dazzle, I'm your best buddy Basil.
And this is Gonz, your favorite Asian provocateur for Christ. Welcome to the podcast where we bring you the best news, which is the gospel message of Jesus Christ, while reporting the egregious with a well-rounded, biblically grounded take on world events. And yes, very special episode, Basil, because were remembering Russ Dizdar and Rob Skiba, a couple giants. And it's interesting that you mentioned the shoulders of giants. Yeah. Because, we talked a lot about the Nephilim and the giants, but also, you think about it in the biblical sense of the Gibborim, not just the bad guys, but they were good Gibborim. That helped out King David and stuff like that. So there's a double thing happening there on the shoulders of giants.
Yes, and as I'm sure many of our listeners have heard of the unfortunate passing of Russ Dizdar and Rob Skiba, and it kind of became obvious to us that we needed to put out an episode like this. In our early days of podcasting, Gonz, back in 2012, I don't think I realized it at the time, but looking back, you and I were incredibly blessed to be, connected to these guys and others, of course. But we were just little podcast babies. We didn't know what we were doing. We just,
I know.
We're two young men with stars in our eyes and some new weird technology called podcasting that nobody understood. And we had weird interests that we had no idea that anybody would be interested in hearing about. And in the early days of Canary Cry Radio, which is our interview style show that we've been doing since 2012, it really was guys like Rob Skiba and Russ Dizdar coming on the show. I think in a way, they were sort of mentors, not in sort of an official sense, but if it weren't for them, starting our podcasting career would have been significantly more aimless and difficult, I think.
If we started News Talk at the beginning, I don't think it would have worked. I think we needed to have our time with these guys and hear their experiences and their research. And then both of them, Rob and Russ, and many others out there. And we've lost too many of these folks, by the way, in our little community in this last couple years. It's been pretty challenging in multiple ways. And it is very prophetic when you listen to some of the stuff that these guys said and what's coming and, how we're going to have to face things and make choices. And, I think, go ahead.
And at that time, these guys had been doing their work for a while as well,
And they hadn't really had the opportunity to share a lot of it, especially in a new medium like podcasting. They were doing their thing, like Blog Talk Radio was a thing. There were some precursors to the official podcast method, that internet radio, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And they were definitely on that. But we had an opportunity to talk to these guys, and they laid down a lot of the foundation for why we're able to look at the news today and the events happening around us and sort of take this approach where we can deconstruct it from a biblical perspective. And then also with the framework of end times prophecy, we knew the punchline is the same every time, but there's just all these variations in how it's the beast itself with its many tentacles are affecting society. It's we couldn't do that the way we do it now, and hopefully get better at it as we move forward if it wasn't for these guys.
Absolutely. We would definitely not be able to be doing news talk, at least as well as we like to think we do it now. If it wasn't for years and years of foundational information being received from guests on Canary Cry Radio, a lot of times coming on over and over and over as research progressed, and again, helping lay down firm informational, almost like libraries of information that serve as sort of the scaffolding that we're able to do Canary Cry News Talk around. And so what we did today is we looked back at some of those Canary Cry Radio episodes. And first, we're gonna start with Russ Dizdar. He was on the show, I believe, only once. Is that right, Guns?
Yeah, and even before we get into Russ, I have a little music piece here. I did not compose this music, but I just put together something nice with a little clip from Rob Skiba and Russ Dizdar to sort of introduce these segments. And I just want to say that the clip you're going to hear of Rob at the beginning here was recorded in 2012 at the Prophecy Club. So just keep that in mind. And what you'll hear from Russ is from his many radio programs that he did. And, I used to always joke about his website, shatterthedarkness.com, is like the most, it's I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. It is, you have to go there and look at it. It's a mashup of MP3 and some, I feel bad because some of the links are dead and I don't know if you can find the files. They're out there somewhere, but Russ put together so much information and just these audio recordings and broadcasts. And it was just all sort of everywhere on his website. So I encourage people to go check it out. But so I grabbed something from the plethora of information that he left there, and just to set things up for this episode.
With regard to a pandemic, again, in true Hegelian dialectic, is where you cause a problem which causes a reaction that you just so happen to have the solution for already ready to go, right? Just imagine this. Whoever they are, they're responsible for everything, right? Release a really bad flu pandemic of some sort. Well, imagine this. If you don't get the shot they've got all ready to go for you, no shot or cure means, well, you don't have a job. Got to take the shot. You can't be a teacher in school, or you can't work at CVS or whatever. You got to take the shot. If you don't take it, there's no cure, no job. You end up being quarantined. You don't want to take the shot? You don't want to take what really I believe is going to be the mark of the beast? Well, fine, you're going to have to be quarantined. Bring you over here. Well, that means you're not going to have any money, which means you won't be able to buy or sell. But if you do take the shot, well, you have some interesting side effects. And there's going to come a time, especially if we're going through this thing, where some tough decisions may have to be made. When you're looking at your kid that's got this pandemic that they released, and they've got this cure over there, but you heard this stuff and the Holy Spirit's telling you, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. We're going to have to work on that strong faith thing and believe in God and trusting in Him. Seriously, I mean, it's just going to get pretty scary in the days ahead.
We need to understand in the area of spiritual warfare the concept of awareness. Awareness is absolutely vital if we're going to be able to live victorious as a believer, if we're going to be able to withstand the works of the enemy, and then actually accomplish ministry in the context. Awareness is needed more than ever because of the ramping up of the dark side to unprecedented numbers, with only more to come. So as I share this with you, I share this with a sense of Holy Spirit-given urgency, both because of the broader ramping up that is coming, that's going to be off the scales by the hundreds of millions, literally to the point of billions, already gripped by some level of Luciferic doctrine, agenda, and being led further with more that is coming into that Luciferic globalism and the coming cause of the Antichrist.
Russ Dizdar appeared on September 24th, 2012 on Canary Cry Radio episode 30, Russ Dizdar interview. And Gons, this was one of the first episodes that you did. You had to take the helm. You did solo. So I was actually not there for this interview, but you were. And what do you remember about it?
I didn't remember that I did it solo. So if that says anything, it took you telling me that I did this interview by myself to realize that. Oh wait, yeah, that's right. That's right. I wasn't mad at you about not being able to time stuff with me yet. So I was like, oh, you can't do it. All right, that's fine. I'll just run it solo.
Yeah. Well, it was very interesting. Russ, he had a lot going on, and part of he was really one of the earliest sort of catalogers and researchers and I don't know, warriors.
Yeah, he's warriors.
Evangelists, of course.
Yeah.
When it came to spiritual warfare, like that was a really big part of what he did. And that's what I loved about Russ, was it wasn't just research. It wasn't just academia or writing books, but he was very active in, actively engaging in spiritual warfare with, the occult and satanic ritual abuse and things like that, which kind of did separate him out a little bit from some of the other people that we respect and love their work, but he had this sort of boots on the ground,
yes,
get your hands dirty, go out and actually engage in spiritual warfare aspect of his life that was very unique.
Yes, and his experience, and we'll play the clips from this episode because it speaks for itself, but just the time he had, especially in the 90s, I reflect back and seeing just as a kid growing up, the mainstreaming of the occult. And I think Russ was experiencing firsthand in ministry the actual rolling out of the controlled, satanic, ritual abused, mind controlled generation. It's just an entire generation that used the media and probably music and all sorts of different ways, the technology that was evolving to just completely, mess with people's minds at a large, I don't know, just in swaths of young people.
Large scale.
Large scale, yeah. And a lot of it, the root of it was Satanism, the deep occult, the deep paganism, the physical stuff taking place. And that's what I loved about Russ, is he helped us see that, yes, these things written down in the word and all the research is true. The supernatural is true. Let me hold your hand and walk you into what that looks like in the real world. Like literally the places where things have happened. He ties in the emotions that are involved in the physical acts, and it really takes us down that rabbit hole to see how real everything is. And he's the kind of guy that helped us see that when you say, oh, it's real, like, oh, satanic ritual abuse is real, or hey, the dirt on the ground is real, it's physically there. Some people only trust what's material and what they can see. The word real just expands into this supernatural, unseen side of things. And he was, again, he lived it. And we lost another great one.
Part of his ministry included training and prayer and making lots of media available for people who sort of wanted to join that fight, which is incredibly valuable as well. And so we're going to revisit some clips from him from episode 30 of Canary Cry Radio that originally came out September 24th, 2012. And should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it. So this first clip here is Russ talking about how he discovered the Satanic Underground and part of his experience forming Shadow the Darkness ministry?
I was a pastor, and when I was working in a Youth for Christ ministry, in the 70s, and we were doing evangelism. And of course, we met, we had to do some deliverances with folks, and so we were used to that. But in the later 70s, while we worked with young people, we noticed that at every single school, we did find kids that were into Satanism, reading the Satanic Bible, ABCs of Witchcraft, all these other books, doing stuff, cutting up animals, and we got called in to deal with that. And then, so we formed a group. I formed a group back in like 79 called, we just simply called it Shatter the Darkness. We took a team and said, we're going to target kids that are into Satanism and that are into the dark, occultism. We're going to go after them to evangelize them. Well, as we began to do that, that led us into dealing with them, where they got their materials, what coven, they began to tell us about where they're meeting, what adults were involving them. That involved more deliverance issues. Then we began to get threat stuff. Then we engaged one night, and that's when I think we decided somewhere in the early 80s, 81, 82, I'm going to go and learn and read every book I can, go to every conference I can, read everything I can. So a number of things occurred. A law enforcement guy somehow got a hold of me. He wanted me to come to the police academy to learn about satanic occult crimes and so forth. He pulled me into some, classes and things like that. I was reading materials. I got a phone call to go deal with a young girl in a psych ward. That was one of the first, and I didn't know what it was then, but a chosen one, somebody who was they had their personalities were forcefully by trauma split, and they had programming imposed into them, highly demonized. They had enormous information and underground satanic language and symbols, and we got into something that we didn't even know what it was at first. The deliverance side was one thing, but that's what started it, and we opened wide to saying, Lord, we'll help any of these, we'll go whatever. More came and more came and more came. We're talking 10, then 20, then 30. The cases started coming in like crazy. So we heard stories. This is what they did over in this basement, or this is what they did over here, and these are the tools they used. So we, behind the scenes, guys, we formed a little unit that would just simply, for these stories, we were going to track them to verify. We were going to use what we learned in law enforcement. We're going to use what we learned, knew in prayer and just prayer mapping and going after it, because there was a lot of deception in all this,
right.
And we needed to find out. We learned the hard way. I'd say for 8 or 9 years, and spent hundreds and hundreds of hours out in the middle of the night, other places, even digging up bones, going to ritual sites, being taken by ex-victims to places. And so that's what we tried to do. We tried to verify. Then we engaged groups. We engaged people threatening. We engaged people showing up at our houses. We engaged undergrounders that were telling us to back off. More victims came in and more, to where throughout the 90s, we were just... I can't even tell you how many or how many hours, how much, but we were all over the place. We went to every conference and tried to read every single book on the market on the subject that was developing. Nobody knew how to deal with the so-called MPD, multiple, even the psychiatry, DSM-3, their diagnostic manuals, they didn't have anything in there. So in the 80s, hundreds began to show up, then thousands. By the 90s, Holly Hector in Centennial Hospital says 2.4 million. Then we engaged the military side of it. Mm-hmm. That's when we engaged unbelievable stuff, tracking stuff, engaging old Nazis involved. And the further we went into the tunnel, the more detestable, the more ugly. I say it this way sometimes, and I really mean this. It's like we were taken just down into the tunnel of hell's kitchen, and we began to see on a systematic level throughout the United States. Then we realized, hey, it's in Canada, it's in Australia, it's in England, it's in Ireland, it's in Germany, it's in Switzerland, it's in Italy, it's deeply in the Vatican. Mm-hmm. And so it just kept building and building and building. And I knew at one point I had to write this book. I had the most fierce opposition I've ever had in my life. I thought we were going to lose my wife in the midst of it. I probably could have wrote a 2,000-page book. About to be 664 pages in the worst of ways, because it wasn't even. We lost some editing issues when it went to the publisher. My wife went to the hospital. They said with an aneurysm. She was doing the editing. She's good, but all these. It was just such opposition in all those years, and so all I can say is the verification on the physical side, we needed to have that, because there is plotted and purposed disinformation going on, and it is really more secretive than the mafia, more secretive than the drug lords, because there's the physical secrecy, but the supernatural cloaking, hiding this, like Ezekiel 8. We had to learn a lot about prayer, intercession, spiritual authority to be able to crack in and engage, and that has just led us. What we have out now is probably a fourth of what I wish we can still get out even before the end.
So there's Russ talking about his experience discovering the satanic underworking and doing the ministry of Shatter the Darkness and discovering how deep the rabbit hole goes. But he's learned quite a few things in his experiences, and I think that's what's really important when he shares some of the things that, the wisdom he can share, I guess, based on the actual boots on the ground experience.
Yeah, it's a different thing when it's coming from someone who's sort of been in the trenches and come out of the trenches to tell you what it's like, rather than someone who, maybe is writing it secondhand or taking it straight from maybe books or something. So
I think it's important to point out, though, that everybody's sort of living their own warfare.
Yeah,
and he just went to the spots where things were just the darkest, and deliberately tearing at the fabric of, the spiritual world and the physical world in a way that is that again ties it all together. But in the process, we're all encountering demonic spirits.
And along those lines, this next clip is Russ talking about how to recognize the presence of the demonic.
Folks that are demonized, the capacity, like in Ephesians chapter 1, we're told that that the eyes of our heart would be enlightened, that we might know the inheritance. Well, what's the eyes of our heart? Well, that's our capacity to receive, perceive, and know God, to know spiritually. We're hardwired to know God. We're hardwired to be spiritual. But if demonic presence comes and opens that, well, the occultists call that opening the third eye. They have an empowerment to see things. Here's the problem. Like when I was in Buddhism and in this astral projection and everything else, we saw things, we heard things, we listened, but we had no ability to actually cut through what they are. Here's a word that I mentioned so many times in the live programs, and I meet people, and they come to me and say, Russ, the Greek word, metaskizmatzatai, I know the word now, Well, that's where, Satan masquerades as an angel of light. Meta skizmazo, the word means that they have the ability to literally, the physics, to completely morph and make a presentation, to be utterly masked. They can look like Uncle Harry. They can look like Grandma Julia. They can look like an alien. They can look like an ascended master, white-bearded ascended master. They can look like a gray. They can more. We've got to understand their ability to perceive us and read us is suprahuman. They're able to morph and change, let alone the fact, guys, that in Ephesians 6, when we're told that our battle is not against flesh and blood, the Holy Spirit, being the infinite God, omniscient, named the species of demons, of fallen ones, Cosmocrator, Arches, the Exousia, the Porneus Pneumaticae. Why didn't he just say, hey, the demons are fighting against you? But here, he references, the Spirit of God says, this is where your battle lies, with the arches, the rulers, with the cosmocrators, like they're like ascended masters and the great white brotherhood and all that kind of stuff. And they're located in the heavenlies, operating down in and wanting to get into lives. So they are different in function, different in type. Jesus says in the one time the disciples couldn't cast a demon out, he says, well, this kind goes out, with only prayer and fasting. Well, the word kind or type, the Greek word, is for species. A species or a specific type of the demonic or fallen angel is different. One's different than they're all same in nature, all same in league with Satan, all the same in their opposition of God. But they some are more powerful, some are more can function differently. So here's the issue. If there was massive violence and there was demonization, here's what happens. A demonized person, like we've seen in some of these cases lately, can be so taken over with superhuman strength, bloodlusting, can go after trying to kill somebody. Or if they're killed and they did have demons, where do the demons go? The demons don't stay in and on a dead body. They never do. If a crazed rapist who's demonized rapes somebody, in the process of the rape, the demon can transfer over and latch on to the victim who has gone passive, who has gone deep into fear, because that's their nature. They're malevolent, they're evil, that's part of their wickedness. If it's happened in a house, if a ritual was done in a backwooded area, if we've been to places where blood rituals have been done and dug up bones and brought them back to the police academy, some of the worst demonic presence and power can be felt in those places. And if you walk into a place where there are spirits because gateways were open, they will perceive you, like in the Gospel of Mark. Anybody can read in the Gospel of Mark. As Jesus was approaching, here's what the scripture says. The Spirit saw him from a distance, coming towards him. A spirit demon in a person can observe. I believe without question they can look at you instantly, whether you have the Spirit of God in you or not. And if you do, it's kind of like we do this humanly. We size people up. We look at people. We get a sense. We perceive. Their abilities in this are far beyond ours. That's why we're told to, the word watch in Colossians 4:2 is gregoruo, meaning look. We're dealing with the demonic now. Look for impending danger. We who have the Holy Spirit should begin to experientially do what the Scripture says. Pray, of course, give thanksgiving, it says in that verse. But now we're supposed to engage the concept of actually watching and looking around and getting a sense whether something from the enemy's coming. It's used in 1 Peter 5 about, be self-controlled, be alert, be watchful, be looking for that impending danger, have your spiritual discernment acute and vigilant, because your enemy, the devil, is roaming around seeking whom he may devour. So I've been on some of those walk places where ghost hunters and paranormal people, they've interviewed me, we've engaged. I can tell you that many of them said, Russ, and these are not believers, we felt the most evil presence, or we felt this. Notice too on the television shows how it's a little girl or a little boy and a little laughter over here and a little noise over here, and it's like that concept, curiosity kills the cat.
Right.
They're in more. They want to go after it more. I don't know if you've seen the movie White Noise.
I have not.
If you get a chance, go ahead and look at it as a research, or the movie Insipid. Those two movies, I think, gave a real picture of the deception that can occur, that draws people in and shows how the other side at first seems to be friendly or trying to draw them in, but then shows behind the scenes how ugly and demonic and horrible and what destruction they can bring. Those two movies I can only say I'm glad. I mean, I say when I say research them, like I do books, to observe them as if you're reading and studying, because the one deals with the EVPs, the electronic voice. And they believe hearing the dead people speak, or coming through the TV, or coming through the radio box or whatever. And that whole thing led this guy to become so obsessed with getting to his wife, but in the end, it is demonic presence, and they attacked him and they killed him. And the other one, Insipid, it even shows this demonic presence behind the scenes, that the people, even the New Age psychic lady who's going to come in and try to, read the ghost and engage the presence, she gets blown out of the waters. And the demonic in that realm wins. Yeah. So I'm just saying in all of this that look how much has ramped up. Did we see this in the 70s? Not really. But have we seen it in the 90s, in the last decade? It's off the charts. It's on television all over. It's all over our city. And I think that there's a game being played, but a curiosity being drawn in. And here's the demonic. 1 Timothy 4:1. The Holy Spirit clearly says, expressly says, the actual word means, it's like you say, the Holy Spirit raises his voice to say, hey, in the end of days, seducing, Greek word planos spirits. Seducing is a correct word for that translation, or deceiving, or the word imposter. They're going to come and they're going to seek to deceive many, meaning massive amounts of people. They're going to try to find some that will actually be guided to write down writings in the scripture. The Holy Spirit calls it didache daimonoia, doctrines of demons. So they're operative, and they can act like anything that they perceive with their suprahuman ability as they look into somebody to think, this is how I'll draw them. This is what I see, that will draw their curiosity. This is what will make it, like the guy on television that says he's reading dead people. He's not reading dead people. He's listening to a spiritual realm that's perceiving the people in the audience and collectively then giving pieces of information.
So the last time that I actually was able to meet Russ was, like in person, was also your last time hanging out with him. Turns out.
Imagine that.
Yeah. And that was at the World Turning Upside Down conference in Ohio back in 2014, I believe.
Yeah. Wow. That is trippy to think about, man. That was
I know.
A long time ago. So for that conference, part of what we were doing was we were doing some sit-down interviews in a strange small room that they had given
shoved us in the back room to do these interviews.
They put us in a tiny back room, and what was it? We were doing like bonus content for the DVD or something.
Yes, they were sit-down interviews with some of the speakers as sort of a more casual, a conversation. But yes, it was super awkward, super weird.
Yeah, well,
that's what I remember from it.
And we were still podcast babies. It's weird to think somebody trusted us to do that so early on. But we met a lot of great people that way, and had a lot of really interesting little conversations. I wonder if somebody out there has that DVD or something.
I'm sure they do.
Get the bonus content. But Russ was one of those. And, the thing I remember, I really don't remember a whole lot from that conference, but I do remember meeting with Russ, and there was such a intensity surrounding, I guess, our perspective of him, because of the very intense work and his very specific knowledge. But he was just so friendly to us. I mean, he had a certain lightheartedness that complemented, I would say, the
intensity of the stuff
intensity and the heavy nature of the stuff that we were sort of dealing with at the time, or that he was presenting to us. So we did spend. That would not stand up to quarantine protocols. Sitting in this tiny little room doing interviews.
And I think, if there was anybody out there that was grinding with the true sense of the word in terms of ministry,
Yeah.
It was Russ. I couldn't believe the number of people that wanted to be in front of Russ, tell them their story, pray with Russ. It was unbelievable. The man was he was like hobbling at the time in 2014.
Yeah.
He was getting around and meeting with everybody and praying and just intercessing.
Yeah. He was doing like spiritual warfare right there. Just always ready.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people were influenced by not just his research, but again, his presence and just being with the guy. He's a smart guy, experienced stuff, and he can ward off the demons in the room. He can clear the air, as he used to say, and just let the demons disperse in the name of Jesus. So
yeah, that was another part of what he was all about too. It was very matter of fact. There wasn't like a whole lot of,
there's not a lot of flash. You don't need it.
There wasn't a lot of flash. He was very sort of practical and simple what he would do when it came to spiritual warfare, which I appreciated, and is an interesting testament to the power that the Lord has to work in those situations. You don't need no flashy silver bullets or crucifixes and
cloth on your face,
whatever it is. Yeah. Okay. Well,
sorry.
Yeah, I know it's weird to think back on.
I know.
So there you go. We, if you're not familiar with Russ Dizdar, there is so much material out there, both put out by him and, interviews on podcasts and things. And if you want to hear the entire interview we did with Russ Dizdar, you can head to, just search for Canary Cry Radio, Russ Dizdar on your podcast player. It was episode 30. And, of course, that was pretty early on. So forgive the technical, quality, but I think it was, a really treasured episode of ours.
You'd mentioned how he's kind of a matter of fact about stuff. He had been fighting spiritual warfare for so long. He's like talking to just a warrior that's just been through these battles, just hardcore and legitimately the same in terms of the intensity and the reality of the situation with the supernatural. But that just gave confidence to everybody else about how true the word is. So,
and I think in another practical sense, he was really good at presenting the idea that occult imagery is everywhere. It's used in a very purposeful manner. And, we kind of take that for granted nowadays where, everybody's kind of aware of occult imagery and there's thousands of YouTube videos on occult imagery in different places and pieces of media. But again, in his very matter-of-fact way, at least for our generation of people in our genre, he laid very firm groundwork on what to keep an eye out for as well.
Yep. All right. Well, I don't even know how to transition because we lost two people in a week. Like two people that are pillars to the stuff we talk about, like the genre you say, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's just unreal. But we did also lose Rob Skiba.
Yeah, Rob Skiba, of course. Again, someone who is very much, we had a lot of contact with Rob Skiba. And in fact, he appeared on Canary Cry Radio 5 times. And as early as episode 16. In fact, that interview was so long, we had to split it up. So episode 16...
Before we had the idea that podcasts can be 4.5 hours.
Could be long, yeah. We had to keep it down to a certain time frame. Oh, how those
current
standards
marketing,
have changed.
the marketing philosophy of 2012 when it comes to podcasting.
Yeah. So he had 2 episodes, episode 16, episode 17, also appeared in episode 42 and episode 63, and also made an appearance on Canary Cry Radio episode 100, which was our sort of marathon 8-hour podcast. We went from having to split up one interview into 2 episodes to putting together, at the time, quite possibly could have been the longest podcast episode in the world.
I don't think it was the longest, but we certainly probably had the most number of guests. It was like 20-some guests.
It was in the running. 8 hours. It was over 8 hours, I believe.
I don't remember, but you know what did kind of not fun about that whole thing was we did officially, this is how ambitious we were back in 2000.
We had so much energy.
Yes. Young thing. Yeah. So we actually submitted to the Guinness Book of World Records, like, hey, most guests on a podcast ever, say, hey, I think we got this. But they declined. They declined that because first off, there is no category.
It was a cop-out. They copped out. We sent them, I forget what the actual number was, but it was something like 30 separate interviews on one podcast. We sent it into the Guinness Book of World Records, and they sent us a letter denying our application because their words were, we would have no way of confirming this.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
it's like,
that was their reason.
Listen to the episode. It's free. It's on a podcast.
I think the logic was that they couldn't listen to every podcast episode in existence. Oh, they weren't going to sit
through. Oh, and that too. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I think that's what it was. Or they just were like, who are these kids who think they can, what even is a podcast? We don't even know what a podcast is.
Well, that's on them, because we could have given them an opportunity to talk about podcasting not that early, but pretty early in terms of legitimizing it by putting it in the Guinness Book putting it in the Guinness Book of World Records. And Guinness on top of the next wave of communication or whatever.
Well,
but yeah,
that's besides the point. The point is, Rob Skiba has been a part of a friend of the family here at Canary Cry Radio for a very long time, even as far back as episode 16, talking about, everything. I mean, so many things, I suppose.
Yeah.
But we have some clips that we're going to bring to you. Now we have a number of, we have more clips of Rob Skiba simply because, he was on 5 or 6 episodes. As I'm going through the episode list too, I think he may have been on episode 44 as well for some reason. Why do I think that?
I know what you're talking about because of the tags. He was such a big part of the community. I included the name on the tag, which is the point. Yeah. So I don't think he appears on the episode, but I definitely.
Yeah, but we actually had the chance to spend some time with Rob in person as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got to meet Rob personally and hang out with Sheila. Let me just play this because I was asked to speak at an online memorial for Rob and couldn't be there in real time, but I did record something here. It's about 10 minutes, just me sharing my thoughts about Rob and my history with Rob. Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Gons, formerly of the Facelikethesun YouTube channel, and co-host of Canary Cry Radio and Canary Cry News Talk. Thank you to Chad for giving me an opportunity to speak here as we remember Rob Skiba and also Russ Dizdar. I mean, I can't believe that both of them are gone within a span of a week. And obviously, within the community, I've seen a lot of people reflect on both of those gentlemen and what they did, what kind of impact they had on people's lives. It's amazing to see. I never log on to Facebook anymore, but I did last night, and I just saw all the pictures and photos and comments and all the love that people were sharing about those two gentlemen. But for this is specifically, I believe, for Rob. And so I wanted to just kind of talk about Rob a little bit, share some scriptures that helped me, wrap my head around this kind of situation. in the past, and hopefully it'll help some of you out there. And I know there's some pretty standard scriptures that people go to, but I was reflecting on just my history with Rob, where I met him and everything else. And I believe I met him in Branson 2011 at the Prophecy Conference there in Missouri. And I was there helping out Doug Hamp's merch desk. And I had just been editing Age of Deceit, the original Fallen Angels in the New World Order. And I had about a half-hour version of it to sort of share with people, let people see it and, get some feedback on it, which eventually I ended up scrapping that whole half hour and redoing all of it, which is the film you see in that was out there. I guess the channel's deleted now, but the film is still out there on other channels and stuff. But Rob was one of those people. I think his merch desk was right next to Doug's. And so I met Rob. I knew of him because of his work. And I think he had been interviewed on VFTB and Prophecy in the News at the time. And, or maybe it was before that. I don't remember all the timelines, but I do remember sitting down, talking to him, hitting it off with him, just getting deep into all the stuff, And I was only a year or two into getting into everything, maybe 2 years. And I hadn't been around a lot of people that talked about this stuff. And that's why when I met Doug Hamp locally in Orange County here, I was like, finally, somebody looking at this stuff, the Nephilim and DNA and transhumanism and Bible prophecy and putting it all together. And Rob was one of those people. And I remember he showed me the Stellarium app. And so I downloaded it on my laptop and I was looking at it and we were looking at different dates and alignments of the heavens. And those are some fond memories for me because it really was one of the first times I couldn't believe how nice Rob was. He was so nice, him and Sheila. And I was just overwhelmed with how kind they were and how knowledgeable Rob was with all this stuff. And he had done his homework. Obviously, everybody watching this and listening to this knows that. And one of the things I remember distinctly is one of the nights at Branson, we went out to dinner, and I don't think that I was responsible for introducing Doug Hamp and Rob Skiba to one another per se, but I recall sitting at the dinner table at this restaurant in Branson and sort of pointing at the both of them and saying, "Hey, have at it. You guys have been looking at this stuff. You guys are big brains on all this Bible stuff and prophecy. Have at it." And that turned into something, the quest for truth for many years. They had worked together and stuff. So, again, I'm not saying I was responsible for introducing those two, but I do remember being at a dinner where I encouraged them to get in deeper into conversation about stuff. And, Rob was so cool and so kind to me. I was working on Age of Deceit 2 a couple years later, and he flew out to Orange County with Sheila. And I think he was doing a seed pitch in Hollywood, and he was kind enough to drive out to Orange County. We had lunch at the Spectrum there, and there was we saw some monuments and stuff at the marketplace there. They have like an obelisk and things like that. But we had lunch at the Cheesecake Factory, and then we went to a spot, a local church, and did a sit down interview. And of course, I'm the fool that I was, I didn't get the audio quite right. So we never were able to use the footage from that interview, that sit down interview with Rob for Age of Deceit 2. But Rob was so kind. He was kind enough to actually re-record the entire interview from home and send me these high quality 4K video. And that's what ended up on Age of Deceit 2, Alchemy and the Rise of the Beast Image. And I was so thankful for that because I was kicking myself. I couldn't believe that I messed up. I'm a filmmaker. I should know how to record an interview in person, and I totally failed. But Rob was just so kind and kind enough to redo the entire thing, which is amazing. The one thing I do regret is not reaching out to him in the recent months and years, especially since we heard about him being a little sick in the last few weeks. I had been meaning to reach out to him, and I just kicked myself for not doing it. I just couldn't imagine that anything was going to happen to him. But I guess it's a lesson learned in terms of telling people that you love and you appreciate, that you love and appreciate them. And I know he knows that, and he knows that now especially. But he appeared on Canary Cry Radio 5 times over the span of, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, I think. He was on episode 16 and 17, which was one big interview we split up into 2. He was on episode, I think it was 42, for the Archon invasion, and then episode 63, he was at the Navigating the End Times. We did a prophecy conference. Basil and I were there in person doing a live Canary Cry Radio, which was kind of I guess it was like a precursor to Canary Cry News Talk. And we had in-person guests, and Rob was the in-person guest. He was kind enough to, fool around with us and be silly and answer ridiculous questions that we threw at him. So we, I was reflecting on some of that, listening back to some of that, and just really warmed my heart, but also just made me emotional because he was just such a brilliant mind, and I know everybody knows that. And then he was also on episode 100, and episode 100 of Canary Cry Radio was this 7-hour thing where we interviewed a bunch of people that we had interviewed in the past, and they jump on for a few minutes, and Rob just blamed Canary Cry Radio for opening him up to the flat Earth conversation. And it's just kind of funny that the last thing he said in that interview was basically, "It's your fault. You're the reason why I went down this rabbit trail." And but he was the truest type, or just the truest form of a truth seeker. If you want to get a definition of truth seeker, it was Rob Skiba. The man was relentless in terms of seeking for the truth, quest for truth, and he was not shy about it. And there are certain things that, theologically or eschatologically, everyone disagrees a little bit with the details or whatever. But it didn't matter. I respected Rob for his work because he would always challenge you. Even if you disagreed with it, he would challenge you to think about it, to study things. And it's something I truly appreciated about Rob. And just a couple scriptures here to wrap up my time here. 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18. And it says, "So we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." And I wanted to mention that scripture because that's what Rob did. He was looking at the unseen. He was relentless at pursuing the unseen. And those are the important things, the eternal things. And his message in terms of the gospel was on point throughout. And again, the surrounding things people may disagree with, but it didn't matter. The point was he was bringing people to Christ. And that was the most important part of his mission. And I also, obviously, Romans 14:8, for if we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. And that's just a reminder that, whether we're alive or dead, if you belong to him, you belong to him. And Rob's going to be with us. He's going to survive in this fallen world that we're in. His work will survive. It will bring people to Christ, in the future because of his books and his lectures and everything else. It will continue. It will make an impact. I'm confident. And he is with us. And, I know people get kind of weirded out about that, Oh, it's weird. But my logic comes from Joshua 1:9 here. And Joshua 1:9, it says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And if absent to the body is present with the Lord, which means Rob is with the Lord now, and the Lord is with us wherever we go, then it follows that Rob is with us, Russ is with us. Those people are not just disappearing. They are with us. And I think their legacy will continue to impact people's lives. And I think our job is to just continue to remember him and pray for the family, pray for Sheila. And, again, my biggest regret is just not reaching out to him. That really stings. That I'm really bothered by that, both Russ and Rob. But, got to be strong, and we will continue to do our part in spreading the good news of the gospel and pointing to people like Rob, because he did all the heavy lifting. He did all the research and the writing and the truth seeking, modeling what that's supposed to look like for us. So, again, I know it's a difficult time for a lot of people, but it's important for us to celebrate and to remember him for what he did. And again, he's not gone. He's in a better place. And the one thing, people, it's kind of a common thing, but he knows stuff now. He doesn't see through a glass darkly anymore, him and Russ. And so I'm sure there's all kinds of revelation taking place up there in heaven. So thank you again, Chad, for allowing me to speak here. Hope everybody has a great evening. So we wanted to start off a clip of Rob from episode 16. It originally aired on July 25th, 2012. And we started off doing what we do 3 times a week on Canary Cry News Talk, was breaking down and deconstructing events happening all around us. And so this first one, we just happened to interview him at the time of the Dark Knight Rises shooter with James Holmes. And we start off with his breakdown of the event in sort of the way that we are able to do now.
It just really frustrates me because they're getting so bold these days. And when I say it's the infamous they,
right.
The ones that are responsible for all the conspiracies out there. And I do believe they are conspiracies. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. It's becomes so obvious when you see, okay, they're getting ready to do a big vote on gun control. And oh, wow, just all of a sudden this guy comes out of nowhere and he's got an AR-15, a shotgun, and some Glocks.
Right.
Right. 3 specific types of weapons. If you've got an AR-15, what do you need a shotgun and a Glock for?
Right.
If this guy is just going to go kill people, all you need is an AR-15. That'll do everything you need it to do.
Right.
But this guy goes in there with 3 specific weapons right before this whole gun control ban thing or whatever they're supposed to vote on, I guess, or whatever. But it also is really suspicious when Lil Wayne comes out with a music video on July 17th, just a couple days, 3 days before it happens. And in his music video, he's dancing in a movie theater, and he's got some people, his friends or whatever, behind him. But the movie theater has skeletons dispersed throughout the audience.
Right, it's bizarre.
Yeah, come on. This whole thing reeks of a setup. It's extremely unfortunate and sad, and we grieve for the families that lost loved ones because real people were killed. But the whole thing reeks of a setup.
Right. And the thing that surprises me is that it's just so obvious, number one. And number two, there's people that I would never suspect of, people who scoff at the whole conspiracy thing have been, shaking their heads and sort of trying to figure this thing out, because there's just so many puzzle pieces that don't fit together, just with the guy's whole story. He's a he's trying to get his PhD in medicine. Right. He's a pretty upstanding guy, no red flags, for the most part, for all we know, that's been reported. How did an unemployed med student get $20,000 worth of tactical gear and guns and everything like that? And they talked about how he had been getting guns for 2 months. Well, anybody who's bought guns before knows that there's a 30-day waiting period after you buy your first gun. Well, I guess I don't know what it's like in Colorado, but as far as I know, you can't. And the level of explosives and everything in his house, and the balloons filled with white powder, and him warning the police that there's explosives in his house. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, and he didn't put up a fight or anything. He just said, yeah, okay, I did
exactly.
it.
Yeah, no fight with the police, no nothing.
Well, I heard.
He's supposedly, I think I read somewhere that he was studying for neurosciences or something.
Exactly.
So the first thing that pops in my head is this a Manchurian Candidate? Is this mind control?
Exactly.
MK Ultra.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it sounds like. That's what it looks like.
And as is a staple for our sort of genre here, there's always pontificating about who is the Antichrist, what is the Antichrist, where does he come from, things like that. But Rob Skiba had something to say about that.
If you look at the Osiris myth, that Horus is basically the reincarnation, essentially, of Osiris in life, while Osiris is down in the underworld. In the Sumerian, it would be, or Babylonian, you got Nimrod and Tammuz. Mm-hmm. So it definitely makes you think, and it's making me think a lot about what could happen in the last days with regard to, I believe Nimrod is the Antichrist, but what does that mean? What does that look like? Will a person begin to be a Gaborim? Or will the physical body actually resurrect? Or will there be a clone of the body that is reanimated? I mean, there's any number of possibilities, but it certainly makes you think.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting that, and I think it was 98, Howie Zawas thinks he found the tomb of Osiris. And then in 2003, CNN reported that they think they found the tomb of Gilgamesh. And we haven't heard anything since then. It's, it's typical media, right?
Yeah, and I talk about that in my book as well as in the DVD that goes with the book. And the DVD is 2 hours long. I did an hour version of it, a 1 hour version of it at the Prophecy Summit. And I show that. I show the tomb of Osiris found, it was 1999.
Okay. The
tomb of Osiris was found, or pumped. It may have been discovered earlier, but when they finally pumped all the water out and were able to go down there and look into it, it was 1999. But in 2003, as you pointed out, in April of 2003, Gilgamesh was found. And then, oh, wow, this is after W got on the aircraft carrier and declared an end to the war. We won. Well, here we are. 9 years later, they finally pulled our troops out of Iraq after fighting a 9-year war that supposedly ended in 2003. We set up the military occupation phase in Iraq in May of 2003, 1 month after finding Gilgamesh. And the first thing, and they built the largest embassy of any other embassy on the planet. They built 500 military bases, and the first thing our troops did was raid the Museum of Baghdad. So, if the report is to be believed, Steve Quayle says that he had talked to a general or somebody that was an eyewitness to this event, and they said that the body that they pulled out of that desert was in a remarkable state of preservation. And one of their primary goals was the extraction of DNA. So, wow. Truth is definitely stranger than fiction these days.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing.
So part of what Rob discussed from his research as well was his view on what the mark of the beast might look like and how it had anything to do with DNA, which was a big topic that we covered as part of the movement of people who covered that information. And, he had some interesting perspectives at the time.
Yeah, ancient cultures, they would kill a bear, drink all the blood, put the skin on, and become a berserker. They were taking on personalities. And all of a sudden now you start thinking about, lycanthropy, is this the whole werewolf thing. When you look through history, you find a lot of precedents that would lead you to believe that there's some truth to that lore. And so that's how I came to the whole mark of the beast thing, because I thought, oh, wow, what if, let's say Nimrod does resurrect. He's a Walking Dead guy, first of all, if that happens. Right. Yeah. And, by the way, let's offer everybody else immortality too. Because if he's an antithesis of Jesus Christ, then that means that as the Antichrist, he's going to everything he does is going to be a counterfeit of what Jesus did. And we think about our salvation. How did we get saved? We got saved through the blood of Christ. And so the Antichrist, it just makes sense that he would also offer a false salvation, a counterfeit immortality that would be purchased through his blood, which would be the mark of the beast. That's how I arrived at it. I arrived at it by thinking, wow, if DNA does actually contain a soul and memories, then wow, what if you just injected part of Nimrod into you?
Right.
You become a Walking Dead guy. The reason why people beg for death and death flees from them is because they're effectively a zombie.
Right. Well, we've speculated on this show also about that verse in Revelation that talks about, people seeking death and not finding it as a possibility of, hey, we talk a lot about transhumanism on this show. And just recently there was a guy named Hayworth who works in Harvard who thinks that there's this new branch of neuroscience called connectomics. I think it's how you say it, connectomics. So connectomics. And basically, it's a computerized neural circuitry where it actually maps out the neurons in your brain in a computer. And so his whole concept and his whole theory, this guy, is getting, $40 million of, money to look into this research. And basically the theory is that within, the next 100 years or so, he wants to be able to live forever because he's going to be able to, upload his consciousness onto a computer. And we've talked about it a lot, but I think it's interesting that there is actual stuff coming out now that specifically talks about the mechanics of how this is going to work. And, who knows if they'll ever get there, like Doug Hamp doesn't think they're going to get there. He thinks Yeshua is going to come back before to intervene, and I'm totally for that. But at the same time, it's interesting to see that they're actually going for it at a very practical level, and they're throwing millions and almost billions of dollars at this stuff. And, we all know where that's coming from. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree completely. And it's strange because almost pick a subject, whatever subject I dive into, I can't get much past 2020, the year 2020. And so it's kind of ironic, but I say I can't see past 2020 because everything is so accelerated and moving at such a fast pace that I just can't see how mankind could survive much past there. And it makes me think of what Jesus said, except those days be shortened, no flesh would be saved.
Next, we're moving on to episode 17 of Canary Cry Radio. This came out on July 31st, just the next week in 2012. And this clip is really fun for me because this was the first time that I think I was really understanding the significance of the apotheosis of George Washington, the rotunda, and sort of the occult rituals that happen in broad daylight by our own governments that nobody really thinks about or it just blew my mind. I had heard about the apotheosis of George Washington and the lying in state.
Yep.
And
the most boring thing you can think of is what the public gets to consume. Yep. The president passed away. We just put him there and we sit there and watch him for a while.
Everybody enjoy this occult ritual. You can just see it on TV.
Just nobody's saying it's an occult ritual, at least to the masses through the media and everything else. It's just,
And so this was the moment that really sunk in with me. And so here it is.
Building of the Capitol and everything. And I knew roughly the time frame that it had been built, but I didn't know when the time frame was when the painting was put in. And she said 1865. And so immediately I thought, whoa, isn't that the year Abraham Lincoln was killed? And she says, yeah, as a matter of fact, he was the first president to undergo the lying in state ceremony. So I said, what's that? And she said, well, that's when they bring the president's body into the rotunda, right underneath, right in the center, which is directly below the apotheosis.
Right.
And they basically leave the body there for a little while, and the excuse is so the public can have a viewing and mourn the president. But when you think of what these occultists are actually all about, you realize all this is Egyptian Babylonian mystery school stuff still being practiced today, and every president that has ever died since Abraham Lincoln has undergone the lying in state ceremony under the apotheosis of George Washington.
Yeah, that blew me away, because I remember when I was a kid, I was probably like 10 years old when Nixon passed away. Yeah. And, we just gotten cable TV, and they had this like 24-hour stream of the rotunda, and the casket's in there, and I'm watching, I'm going, this is really boring. It's just like a live feed of that with people walking through, and I'm like, wow, this is really boring. But now that I know, it's like, wow, there was a reason behind it, an esoteric, occult reason behind it.
Yeah. And just so our listeners are familiar, why don't you give just a short description of what the apotheosis of George Washington is. Sure. And sort of what it means?
Yeah, it's really bizarre. You got people like David Barton, who's out there talking about the Christian heritage of our country. This is a Christian founded nation, and our founding fathers were great, and blah, blah, blah. And movies like Monumental with Kirk Cameron.
Oh, gosh.
They're showing all this stuff and hyping up the idea that our founding fathers were Christians and stuff. And it's like, no, they weren't. I mean, they had a nice facade of Christianity, but you see very quickly as you really look into these guys and don't just take the selected quotes that they pull out. I think right. Chris Pinto did a phenomenal job in his documentary, The Hidden Faith of Our Founding Fathers, of showing the other quotes that Barton and others conveniently leave out.
Which are just bizarre to hear.
Oh, yeah, and it's sick. You realize these guys were actually deists that were heavily entrenched in the occult.
Right.
And so when you realize, who these guys really were and what they were about, all of a sudden the layout of Washington, D.C. starts making a whole lot more sense. All the paganistic statues and structures in Washington, D.C. start making sense. And then you think about the apotheosis of George Washington, it starts making sense. You've got this painting that's in the center of the dome, Capitol Dome. So when you're in the rotunda, on the ground floor, you see all the pretty paintings that Barton and Kirk Cameron and people like that will point to, and they look like nice Christian heritage type pictures. Yeah, they're pretty. But the further up you go, the more sinister and occult it gets. You see the frieze of American history, which in and of itself seems, pretty mundane. It's cool. It's nice. It shows various scenes of American history. You got Columbus. It goes all the way around to the Wright brothers' first flight. But shortly after Columbus, you see Cortez and Montezuma and the Aztec calendar stone. You're kind of like, what? You got the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. You get all these, iconic pictures of American history. But then you got that,
and that's the actual the long calendar count of the Mayans used. For 2012. Yeah,
for 2012. So automatically you have to be like, what? What's that doing there? It's just so bizarre, but it's just kind of tucked in there. It's kind of just squashed between some other paintings. So you see that, and then you keep looking up until you see a ring of 72 pentagrams that are binding utilities in the occult. So you got these 72 binding utility pentagrams surrounding this painting of George Washington seated in heaven as a god. And now that's what apotheosis essentially means: ascending into godhood, the deification of man. But if this is supposedly a Judeo-Christian founded country, and this is a scene in heaven, well, you think you might see Yeshua there, maybe Abraham, maybe Moses, Gabriel, Michael, something. No, you don't see any of that. You see Vulcan, you see Minerva, you see Mercury, the messenger of the gods, and seated at his feet are the founding fathers taking notes. It's total Greek pantheon of pagan gods, and there's George seated right there. He's got two women, one on either side of him, and then surrounding,
this smile and everything.
Yeah, in this little scroll or whatever in his hand, or a book or whatever he's got there, and then he's got a woman on either side of him, and then surrounding them in the circle, going all the way up to the top part of the dome, is 13 maidens that each have a star above their head. And the two that are directly opposite George are holding a banner that says "E pluribus unum."
Right.
And now I learned as I started studying symbols is the iconography contained within a symbol has to harmonize with itself.
Right.
because it's revealing something. And so in the context of what this picture is saying, E pluribus unum takes on an entirely different meaning, as do the 13 stars above each of the heads of those women, because 13 is Osiris, and he was chopped into 14 pieces, but only they found all but one, which Isis formed into the obelisk, the missing piece. So the 13 remaining pieces is Osiris, and so all of a sudden, all of the 13 colonies, 13 stars, 13 stripes, everything starts falling into place. What this stuff really represents, and it's really just laid right out for you in that phrase "e pluribus unum." We were taught, many states, one nation, many ethnicities, melting pot, all that. The garbage. If you take the iconography in the symbol as a whole, it's telling you many gods representing one person, or one person represented as many gods.
Right. Well,
that being Nimrod.
Next, we have a series of clips. These are from episode 42 of Canary Cry Radio that aired on February 14th, 2013. And this is really Rob Skiba getting into the meat of things, Gons.
Yeah, and he was able to contribute so much to the conversation of Genesis 6. And we have these clips here. He's talking about Ishtar, Nimrod, Noah, Shem, as Melchizedek, Gog, Magog. I mean, the stuff that he brought to the table and presented, it is one of those things where you look at it and there's no way to deny the reality of what's going on here.
Yeah.
And especially what those scriptures explain to us as what's going on in the simplest of ways. Even though it is wild and crazy to think about genetic mutations and intermingling and hybrids and all this kind of stuff, it's almost not difficult to see when you have all this information laid out in front of you that Rob was able to collect and present.
Let's let him roll.
That one actually made me take a step back. I'm looking at that particular use of Archon. It's in the feminine use. And I thought, whoa. And that's actually what kind of spurred the writing of one of the chapters in the book called Suspicious Women and the Rise of the X-Men. That's chapter 6 of the book, is because I started looking at various goddesses. Starting in the Bible, you got Diana of the Ephesians, or Artemis. You got Ashtoreth. You got the Queen of Heaven mentioned in Jeremiah. So, we have female goddesses mentioned in the Bible, but of course, a lot of them in the Greek myths and in myths of other cultures as well. And so when I saw that particular word in Ephesians 6 was feminine, I was like, oh man, that's just crazy. And I don't know if we talked about this one of the last times I was on your show or not, but in Revelation 9, it starts off by talking about the star falling from heaven that has the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit.
Right.
Revelation 9 starts with talking about the angel with the fifth trumpet. So we have a use of or an understanding that there's an angel in that picture there. And a lot of times, or at least some of the times, stars represent angels as well. But that's not what we're seeing in Revelation 9. You've got a clear difference here where you have the fifth angel sounding a trumpet and then a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And it says, unto him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Well, when I saw the phrase star fall from heaven, it jumped out at me because we see the same phrase used in the book of Acts. I think it's chapter 19, if I remember right, where Paul has stirred up a lot of trouble in Ephesus. And they basically had to have a city council meeting kind of thing put together. And like the mayor of the city or whoever he was just said, hey, look, why are we listening to these Jews? We all know Diana of the Ephesians here that fell from heaven. And when I saw that in Acts 19, it's talking about Diana of the Ephesians, which fell from heaven, that stood out to me when I saw the same phrase used again in Revelation 9, fell from heaven. So a friend of mine grew up in Greece. He speaks Greek fluently. I asked him, I said, can you look at the Greek text here and tell me if there's any reason, because the word he is one of those personal pronouns. It could be he, she, it, they, them, us, whatever. Right. And so based on the context, you got to look at the antecedent. And he said, he cocked his head and he goes, well, that's weird. I said, what? He goes, actually, that pronoun should be she. I said, why? He said, because star, the word star used there is in the feminine. And so I believe that Revelation 9, where it talks about the star that fell from heaven, is actually probably Ishtar Semiramis, the female counterpart of Nimrod, who is the one that we see coming up out of the bottomless pit in Revelation 9:11.
Wow.
And if that's true, then I believe that this is the woman named wickedness that we read about in Zechariah chapter 4. Where in Zechariah chapter 4, you got those two stork-like women flying with this ephah thing,
Right?
And Jim Williamson has done some really good work on that, describing the ephah. That basically it sounds like a flying saucer with a lead cover, and inside of it is a woman named Wickedness. And if you keep reading in Zechariah, it says, actually I think it's Zechariah 5, it says that she touches down in Shinar. Well, that's Nimrod's hometown. It says in Zechariah chapter 5, then I said to the angel that talked with me, whither do these bear the ephah? And that's the thing that she's in. And in verse 11, and he said unto me to build an house in the land of Shinar, which of course is where the Tower of Babel was built. And it shall be established and set there upon her own base. Like it sounds like a UFO platform for Ishtar, Isis, Semiramis to return. And so it made me question and wonder, because Diana, Venus, all these different goddesses associated with the moon and fertility, they all trace back to the same person, just like so many of the gods trace back to Nimrod. And so when you realize Apollo is one of the names that trace back to Nimrod, and he shows up in 9/11 as a result of this star opening up a shaft that lets him out, I thought, whoa, wait a minute. Is this the Archos that we see, the feminine use of rulers in Ephesians 6, coming back to release her half, what is it? She's his mother / half sister / mother. I forget how it works. There's a crazy relationship.
Mother type thing going on.
Yeah, she's his mother, but also his half. It's crazy. I mean, and his wife. But I believe she is the whore of Babylon in the physical sense.
Right.
Coming back, and I saw in the Mesopotamian text that it actually says that she left the earth in basically a spaceship. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 11, it says, even the gods were afraid of the flood weapon, and they withdrew and went up into the heaven of Anu. And it talks about Ishtar being among them, leaving the earth, basically, at some point. So, I don't put a lot of stock in von Daniken and Sitchin's work, but that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. They may be onto something with some of it. It's just coming to the wrong conclusion. So, that's kind of where my journey's taking me in some pretty far out directions.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting little gem, actually.
Yeah, that Revelation 9, that one really got me thinking. So I would just say, hey, I'm just a researcher. I'm a student like anybody else. I'm not declaring any doctrine here. I'm saying go read Revelation 9, compare it to Acts 19 and Zechariah 5, and tell me what you think.
Right.
Seriously.
Isaiah 65:20 says, there shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath fulfilled his days, for the child shall die 100 years old. But the sinner being 100 years old shall be accused, or accursed, So it's Isaiah is talking about the millennial reign, is saying that somebody who's only 100 years of age is considered a child.
Huh. Wow.
And so I'm using Bible to confirm Bible here. Right. It makes sense that they didn't get married until right before the floodwaters came, because they were only 98 to 100 years of age themselves.
Right, because, I think it says in Genesis 11 that Shem was, 100 years old?
I think it was 98.
98 for the flood, and then 100 when he had his first son.
Arphaxad or something like that.
Arphaxad, yeah. Which I actually did some calculations today, and I thought, how strange that if I got this right, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but I think Noah was alive when Abraham was born.
Yes, actually, there was an overlap of about 50 years, if I remember right.
It was like 50 or 60 years, yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is really wild, and the overlaps are significant. They're very important for us to understand, because Shem lived. He lived. Obviously, he was born just before the flood.
He lived 500 years after he had Arphaxad, so He lived for 600 years.
Yeah, that's right. So he lived into the time, well into several people's ages. You know, Noah lived, like you said, about 50 years into the life of Abraham, but Shem lived through the time of well into Jacob's life, I believe. Definitely in Isaac's, but I think he was either just prior to the birth of Jacob or just after that he lived as well. So, I mean, you've got a direct tie. We talk about 6 degrees of separation. When you look at the overlap from Adam to Noah, how many people overlapped each other, how many people are still alive, and had a chance to get firsthand information from people.
Right.
About the creation of the world and who Jehovah really is, and it's pretty significant. And I believe that Shem is the Melchizedek that we read about in Genesis after the Genesis 14 war, where Abraham is talking with Melchizedek.
Right, the high priest.
It was in fact Shem.
Huh, I've never heard that before. That's interesting.
Yeah, but Joshua actually tells you point blank that.
Oh, really?
Is, but a lot of people want to say that Melchizedek is kind of a pre-incarnate Jesus. I say, well, you got a problem with that because that means he lived on this earth for an extended period of time, ruling and reigning over cities before the virgin birth of from Mary.
Right.
So I really don't agree with that idea. It says that he was in the order of Melchizedek. Which should say something to you. It was an order. It wasn't just an individual. It was a title of an order, a class of people, actually a priesthood of people prior to the Levitical priesthood. That caused me a little bit of concern, obviously, because I'm like, no, that can't be. That would mean we all do, first of all. And it would also mean that Yeshua did, because he's a descendant of Shem, at least through Mary. And I thought, well, okay, let me look into this some more. And as I did, I started studying up on genetics. I discovered a Punnett square. That's a tool that's used to determine genetic offspring potential. Like if you've got a certain trait and your wife has a certain trait and you want to figure out if your kids are going to end up with that trait, you can do what's called a Punnett square to figure it out. And just in a nutshell, just to make it simple, I say, okay, if we suppose that the women were 50-50, they've got 2 X chromosomes. Let's say one of them's tainted with Nephilim genetics and one of them's good because they're a hybrid. So if you take the 2 X's of the female, one tainted, one not, and they mate with a normal male, that being Shem, Ham, or Japheth, they've got a good X and a good Y chromosome, then you have a 50-50 chance of producing either a good, completely normal, non-corrupted human or a tainted genetic offspring. It's 50-50.
Right.
So if you produce a kid that's completely normal, you're done. You don't have to worry about it anymore. If you produce a kid that's 50 that falls on the other side of the 50% odds that ends up with Nephilim, well, then you got a problem. And God's solution for that was utterly destroy them. And so can God affect the odds? Well, sure. Clearly he does in a number of places that we see in Scripture. But there's an ancient record of the fact that when in Leviticus it talks about casting lots for Jehovah or Azazel with regard to the scapegoat ritual of the Day of Atonement. And it would either come up for Jehovah or it would come up for Azazel, and it was like a white stone and a black stone, and I think it depended on which hand it came up on or something. I don't remember exactly the details, but there is a well-known Talmudic, I believe, if not rabbinic writing that talks about the fact that for 40 years leading up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the lot always came up for Azazel in the same hand. Statistically, that's impossible. So, and what God was showing was, hey, I'm done with this whole goat sacrificing system. I sacrificed my only son as the one pure lamb, final sacrifice. It is finished. So for 40 years, God affected those odds. So it appears to me to be linked to an obedience issue. Shem, obviously being the Melchizedek, who was certainly a person who carried forward the righteousness of his forefathers. Whereas Ham, you see right off the bat after the flood, he's doing something weird in the tent with his dad and seems to have some attitude issues as you go throughout the rest of the scriptures. And he talks about disobedience in the Bible, saying that he visits the iniquities of the fathers unto the 3rd and 4th generation. Well, immediately you have to acknowledge that has to be genetic if it's going down to genetic offspring, whereas obedience is honored to 1,000 generations. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, it appears that there's an obedience and a heart issue going on as to how the odds came out. Clearly in Shem, the odds seem to have always been in favor of good, normal, completely healthy children based on the Nephilim Punnett square. Whereas Ham, it clearly appears to be, it fell on the bad side. And Japheth, for the most part, it was good, but there's a few suspected ones in his lineage as well, namely Gog and Magog. Which just blew my mind because it throws the whole Ezekiel 38 war into a whole different category, for me anyway. Everybody likes to look at that and think, oh, it's the Russians and the Chinese and whatever. I'm like, well, I stood on the Great Wall of China in 2006 and came to find out that the Great Wall of China was originally known as the Ramparts of Magog. And as I started looking into Magog and Gog, I found all through history they are referred to as giants. In fact, even to this day, they have the Lord Mayor Parade in the UK every year, and they march these two huge statues through the streets of the UK named Gog and Magog, two big giants. So they're always, and you know how that got started? This is crazy, man. When you go down some of these rabbit trails, because the Lord Mayor Parade was started by King John Lackland of the House of Plantagenet, who was an Angevin. And the Angevins themselves, they called themselves the brood of Satan. So, now, King John Lackland, signer of the Magna Carta, is the same guy that all of our U.S. presidents just so happen to be related to. And he's the guy that started this Nephilim parade called the Lord Mayor Parade, where they march these two huge statues of Gog and Magog, even to this day, through the streets.
Wow.
I mean, it's just crazy. I mean,
that's mind-blowing.
You see in Joshua 4:18 that the corruption of all flesh came as a result of the mixture of animals and humans, and one species being mixed with another. And that's also confirmed in Jubilee 7:24, where they sinned against the beasts and birds and everything that moved and walked on the earth. We're talking about genetic manipulation. So to answer your question, Gons, where you say, what's the difference? The days of Jared were marked by the production of angel-human hybrids, whereas the days of Noah were marked by the production of animal-human hybrids. And I could turn on the evening news and open to Matthew 24, and it's the checklist. Okay, wars, rumors of war, earthquakes, pestilence, got it. Oh, days of Noah. What's going on in the days of Noah? Animal-human hybrids. Hey, the UK just announced 150 animal-human chimeras created in the laboratory. Right. I don't see angels mating with women right now, but I do see animal-human hybrids being produced in the labs.
Right.
And
yeah, and
that's a big one for me.
Yeah, and I just want to interject and just say that, you had also talked about the sort of widening the definition of the word Nephilim into something, Nephal comes from the word Nephal, which just means fall. And
it has a lot of meanings, actually.
Right. Well, that's just one of them. But I know that it's not necessarily describing a race, so to speak. It's more of a corruption.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think when you start looking at it that way, and you look at what we're dealing with today, not just in the human-animal hybrids, but this whole movement of transhumanism in terms of technology and man merging. I think that it's possible that the famous Daniel passage of iron won't mix with miry clay. Well, there was an article that came out last year that talked about synthetic living cells that they've created that are made out of metal-based living systems. And I'm thinking, whoa. This has a completely different meaning here. And, we've heard from 2006 about brain cells interfacing with microchips. And I mean, it's all heading in that direction. So it doesn't necessarily have to be fallen angels mating with humans. It can be anything that is going to alter and derail the image that we are made in, which is, the image of God, and all the kinds that God created each kind after. And it's the corruption of that which constitutes a Nephilim. And when you define it that way, it starts to open up like, whoa, like the days of Noah are here. It's not like it's going to be here. It's like, no, it's happening. You know?
It's here. Exactly. Yeah. You just nailed it. Exactly. And it's funny because I had Doug Hamp's book, Corrupting the Image, and Tom Anita Horn's book, Forbidden Gates, sitting on my desk. I was formulating some of these ideas in my head, and they were arranged on my desk with Doug's book on the left and Tom Anita Horn's book on the right. And I looked at that. I said, whoa, wait a minute. What if Corrupting the Image leads to opening forbidden gates, that the result is the creation of Nephilim? And so I began to think of it in terms of just what you said. Nephilim is simply corrupted seed, something that has been changed and modified from the kind that God originally created it to be. And you're right. That opens up a huge Pandora's box of possibilities.
One of the most awkward things that we've ever done, Basil, is a live Canary Cry radio episode.
And that is a long list of awkward things that we've done.
Many awkward things, but one that comes to mind often and sits close to the top of the list, I would say, was episode 63 of Canary Cry Radio, which aired on February 21st, 2014. And we talk about navigating the end times. And it's live, and that's the big thing. We're in person, you and I, on a stage, a smattering of audience, really dark out there. The way they had the stage set up, they had these really bright lights on us and literally could not see a single soul.
Could not see a single thing.
Craziest thing.
And we were scheduled super late at night. We were like the last thing scheduled at this conference at like, I don't even know, but I want to say like 10 we were set to present because we were doing this new thing, live podcasts, which a lot of podcasts hadn't done. Now tons of podcasts do it. But at the time I think, we were inspired by some other podcast who had done it once or something. So we're like, okay, maybe we can make this a thing. We'll do live in-person live audience podcast. This will be great. And it was so weird. We were scheduled at like 10 p.m. There was maybe 20 people in an auditorium that could seat, 500. And we had super bright lights.
God bless the people that were there, because we still know some of the people that were in the audience that night.
Yes,
and you guys are troopers.
And we had put together a really sort of intricate multimedia experience.
Well, we tried.
We tried our best. Again, little baby goo goo gaga podcasters. But
by the way, let me just mention, because I know this is not about us, but this live event, I recall us trying to figure out what we're going to do on stage. Mm-hmm. Was it maybe a day before we ran through a quick thing, but literally it was not much prep for this thing. It was not enough prep for sure.
Well, we thrive under pressure, Gons. Now we do live podcasts 3 times a week, but we just do it from the safety of our homes. But part of this included bringing up guests on stage, and Rob Skiba was one of them.
Yep. Just to set things up, because I think the clip needs context. If you want to listen to the whole thing, you can. But the clip starts with a couple things in mind with the visual. I don't know if a visual exists of this event. Hopefully it doesn't. But on the screen was a outline of a man and an arrow pointing to the back end of the man.
The rump.
And you had presented this idea about the mark of the beast, that, if everything that is prophesied is to happen, except for the mark on the right hand or the forehead.
Yes.
Would you accept that thing because you know that it's not the mark of the beast? It's a good question.
I think it was a very really valid question. It's a question that even counts today. If it's not on the forehead, if it's not on the right hand or forearm, what if it's on your butt? Does it still count as the mark of the beast?
I think it was, first off, the question was ahead of its time. I'll give you that. I'm going to tell you that.
Thank you.
You were articulating something that you saw as a watchman well before people can articulate the nuances of this conversation. So I'm going to give that to you. However, it did make for a very awkward room. They didn't know whether to laugh or to not. And
I thought it was going to be a big, funny laugh, and people were more shocked than anything. I don't think they were expecting us to be making jokes or something. I don't know. It was so awkward.
Yes, but it
was Rob Skiba on stage for that moment?
Yes, we call up Rob to ask him this question.
Oh no, I can't believe I did that to him.
Not only that, we didn't know what we were doing. And not only that, and this was your thing at this event, was every guest that we talk to or whatever that we do, you would just put their face, because you were controlling the video monitor, you would put their face just as large as possible on the screen.
Oh my gosh.
Normally people do
it was like a big 20-foot screen. It was a big screen behind us.
He blew up the face, so it's a real tight shot of the face on the screen. So that's what Rob was walking up to. Not to mention the music that I chose. I tried to play it off like, who chose this? You'll hear it. But I chose the music, just, admitting I'm revealing things now. But I felt awful about it. I was like, why did I pick this music as I'm playing? I'm like, this is the worst music. And your setup just made it even worse. That we're calling up Rob to just save us.
Rob was such a trooper, man. Rob was
he saved us.
He did save us from ourselves that night.
Yes, and we have a good laugh now. But here it is.
If only we had a friend in the building who was familiar enough with the current state of global transhumanist movement and Bible prophecy to discuss this. Could such a person exist? I think he does. Mr. Rob Skiba, are you out there anywhere? Hold on, let me get my flashlight. I don't know, he might have missed the memo. There he is. Right, you got a microphone for him? Oh,
I don't know what's up with this music. Who chose this music for Rob?
I did. Okay, all right.
Go on.
So, do you need to see the diagram again?
No, I don't need to.
Okay.
Thanks for the setup.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm with Gons on that. I'm going with what the Bible says.
Okay, but if every detail...
Forehead and wrist or hand.
Okay, so you're saying that all the Christians out here, all 14,000 of them, and all of the people listening and everything, if there's something that comes out that limits your ability to buy, sell, and trade, that pledges allegiance to whatever system is taking over, but it happens not be on your hand or on your forehead and just, somewhere else. That it means nothing.
Okay.
It's a tough question.
Where are you going with that? Would I do it?
Yeah. Would you take the mark?
I'm very wary of anything that has to do with government, period.
Right.
So if they're trying to make me do something like that, it's going to be a no.
Right. Well, okay. Even if beheaded.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so where do you see the state of affairs, where we are and where it relates to, the technocratic part of the coming of the sign of, or the mark of the beast and things like that?
Are you asking me what I think the mark of the beast might be? Or
yeah, just give us a general thing.
Here's the thing. The devil counterfeits everything God does. So how do we have our salvation? What's our salvation? What purchased our salvation? Blood. We have our salvation through the precious shed blood of the Lamb, Christ. Jesus shed his blood and we have salvation through him. So I don't think it's unreasonable to believe that the Antichrist might offer something that has to do with his blood, which would guarantee a counterfeit immortality. The reason I say that is because, yes, we know about the buying and selling issue in Scripture, but there's also those verses that talk about in those days men will beg for death, but death will flee from them. Mm-hmm. So it appears that they have, in some way, purchased a counterfeit immortality. And at that point, they are no longer redeemable. They're cast alive into the lake of fire. Cast alive into the lake of fire. So it is my belief that how that looks as far as, the hand or the forehead, I don't know. I don't know how that would be incorporated. But I do believe it's going to have something to do with the blood, probably the blood of the Antichrist, if he's in fact a direct antithesis of Jesus Christ.
I would add too, Basil, since you're playing the other side here, but it's okay. It's okay.
I'm just asking questions, man.
Sure. I mean, it's possible that the mark on the forehead or the hand is not the actual product itself that, causes the global enslavement program, but simply just that, a mark. And maybe the chip or the element that does actually tie you into the system could be anywhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, you think about, like, if you ever go to the hospital, they put a needle in you,
Right.
Intravenous or what have you. A lot of times they'll put it in, at your wrist, your arm, or whatever. I don't know what the delivery mechanism is going to be. I really don't. I don't think any of us do. We'd be speculating. But there's clearly a mark of some sort that ends up either on the hand or on the forehead. But I believe that whatever this is, be it a microchip or a genetic marker or something, it's going to change us genetically such that we are no longer redeemable at that point. And that's a frightening thing, And there's some people who would say, well, what do we need to worry about that for? And you know what? You talked about prepping. Now, I don't want to get into the debate of the rapture. I hope it's a pre-trib rapture, personally. That'd be awesome. But, I'm like, well, what if it isn't? Because the way I look at it is I'd rather be prepared and not have to be prepared than not be prepared when I need to be prepared. So, I want to get as educated about this stuff as I possibly can, learn all about it, look for the signs of what evidence there might be of such things happening so I know what to avoid and not to get involved with. And the corruption of all flesh is something that's very much on my mind as far as my research. In Genesis chapter 6, everybody talks about 1 through 4 in the Nephilim, but Genesis 6 verse 12 said that all flesh had become corrupted in the days of Noah. And also Genesis 6:3 is very intriguing to me because Genesis 6:3, God says that, his spirit would no longer be able to dwell with man, but his days shall be 120 years. And my research has led me to believe that the reason he said that is because the corruption of all flesh that took place in the days leading up to the flood were in the last 120 years of Methuselah's life. And during that time period, and there are extra biblical sources, and I understand that they are extra biblical. They're not canonized. I get it. I don't treat them as scripture. But I think Doug Hamp said it well. He says they make for excellent commentary on the scriptures, and the Hebrew people who wrote the scriptures a lot of times would quote from these books or reference them. If we are to put any value in them at all, then the extra biblical text of Joshua and the extra biblical text of Jubilees both talk about in the latter days of Methuselah, men began to blend themselves with animals and with plants and fish and birds and reptiles. It's transhumanism. And all I have to do is read Matthew 24:37. Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. Watch the evening news, and we're seeing the creation of genetically modified organisms. We're seeing 150 animal-human chimeras created in the laboratory in the UK. We are doing transhumanism. And my view on that is that God created everything to reproduce after its own kind. The Bible says that in repeated places. So what happens when you create something that is no longer a kind that God originally intended to be? You and I, we all, as normal human beings, have a space inside of us, a God space, that the Holy Spirit's allowed to come into. That God made us so that he could dwell within us. But if we corrupt this image in such a way that he can no longer dwell within us, then I believe that that's Genesis 6:3. If you guys don't stop what you're doing, my spirit will no longer be able to dwell within you. And then it's too late. I have no choice but to wipe you out. And that's what I believe happened in the days of Noah. And I believe those are the days that we're stepping into today with all this transhumanism. Like you, I'm not afraid of technology. I love technology. I'm concerned with singularity and some of the things that they're doing with that, where we get to the point where we take whatever is us and put it in a machine. But bionic leg, bionic arm, eye, whatever, I think that could be beneficial and help people. I'm not worried about that. Well, I am worried about blending with animals and species that can actually change or alter my DNA so that I am no longer capable of being a house for the Holy Spirit to come and dwell within. That's very scary.
Amen.
All right.
Rob Skiba, everybody.
And to round out the clips that we have for Rob Skiba here, episode 100, he participated in the potentially groundbreaking world record-setting episode of Canary Cry Radio. And he so graciously came on the show and talked. It was kind of a fun episode because we weren't just presenting information. We were also checking in with guests and thanking them for being a part of the show and everything. And notoriously, Rob had something very specific to talk to us about. And maybe we should just go right into it, Gons.
And we're just losing it, man. We're losing it.
All right, teleportation, Nater Tater. Take us to Rob Skiba.
Later, Tater.
Later, Tater. Whoa. There he is.
Hey, Rob. What's up? What's up, man?
Rob, why are you looking at us like that, buddy?
Well, I have to say, you guys screwed me up for the last 7 months.
How's that?
It's all your fault.
We hear that a lot. What's the reason this time?
A lot of times when I'm traveling on the road, of course, in Texas, everything's a long trip. It's not like just down the road. It's a half hour to 45 minutes minimum. Well, I went to do my taxes in April 13th, and a lot of times I'll download a podcast or something to listen to on my drive, and you guys are one of my go-to places for that. So I went there and I see this thing, Flat Earth with Mark Sargent, and I'm going, well, is this like an April Fool's joke or something? I figured you guys were just goofing or whatever. So I downloaded it. That'll be a good listen. I listened an hour and a half drive to go do my taxes, and I'm rolling my eyes when I first start listening to this.
Right.
But by the end of it, I'm scratching my head going, well, shoot, some of that made sense. So I've kind of screwed up doing my taxes. I finished my taxes and I have an hour and a half drive back home. So I decided to listen to it again. And I've been screwed up ever since.
Yeah, that whole flat Earth or enclosed system, or however you want to put it. Mark Sargent likes to make sure that we call it other things in addition to flat Earth. But it's really making this weird resurgence, and a lot of the stuff is at least I can safely say compelling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you've kind of gotten on that train and then done your research on that, or what's been going on?
Kinda. Dude,
Mm-hmm.
I've got probably 30 hours worth of YouTube videos produced on it now.
Whoa.
And easily 200, if not close to 300 pages of printed content in blog format, you print out. Yeah, it's, when I first went down that rabbit hole, my first thing is I'm going to debunk this,
Right.
This is because I have the same knee-jerk reaction everybody has. This is crazy. This is stupid. This is insane. But, I have to tell you, when you start looking at the NASA photographs and stuff like that, and you start seeing words like composite, and you start seeing the Photoshop clone tool being used quite liberally,
Right.
in their artwork. And then this is what really got me. I was watching some kind of, I don't know, it was a Discovery Channel documentary or something, and they had, Earth's imagery and whatnot. And there's this one particular blue marble that is being used over and over and over again as a video effect, like a transition, a wipe. And it was the blue marble that if you bought an iPhone or an iPad, it was the background.
Yeah.
2002.
I get yeah.
Well, that particular Earth, if you look at that blue marble, there's a weird cloud formation just off to the, I guess, kind of like the northwest of the United States, kind of off the coast of Maine, maybe Nova Scotia. It's like a backward C with a long tail, and in front of the C is kind of a horizontal line. It's a very, once you see it, you can't not see it.
Very unique.
You can't unsee it. Well, I start seeing this over and over and over again as video transitions, and I'm going, wait a minute. If this is a real legitimate NASA thing, I mean, how nice of them to make a 3D model for all the videographers in the world to use, as a video transition.
Right.
And then I realized I used it. I did a virtual conference back in December, and my friend Rick Hummer helped me do an introduction for it, and we used that Earth.
Really?
So now I'm going, okay, this is clearly, it's a 3D model. It's not the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that's the first thing I did. But the second thing I did, which should have been the first thing, was consult the scriptures. And I have to tell you, if you put all your preconceived notions and biases aside, that we all have, because we've been taught globe since we saw it in kindergarten. At least for me, I cannot get a spinning heliocentric ball out of anything in the scriptures.
Mm.
And that's when I was pretty much hosed after that, because I've built my entire ministry of telling people, hey, the Bible's true, and you can take it as your source for truth, and take it literally. Well, especially if you're a King James only guy, you take it literally, welcome to the Flat Earth Club.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And Gons has shared, and people have shared with me that they noticed a flat Earth trend going on in Rob Skiba land, and so I was very interested because
your fault.
It's my fault. I guess we can't deny that blame. We get a lot of emails specifically about the Mark Sargent episode and the flat Earth, and some of it is good, some of it is positive towards him, some of it is negative, but also some of it is negative just among other flat earthers.
Yeah.
Like there are some flat Earth. That was one thing that I kind of enjoy about the Flat Earth Club, is that even within its ranks, there's people still trying to figure it out and disagreeing and stuff. And I think that's even from if we're going to talk about the scientific method, you need that if you're going to have a true
inquiry.
Inquiry into what's going on.
Well, it's funny because you guys know this in Christian circles. Pre-trib, rapture, mid-trib, post-trib, and they're all fighting and calling each other heretics, and no shortage of subjects in Christianity to go off on somebody about.
Right.
As soon as I was sort of introduced to that world, you got the Eric Dubé and Mark Sargent and Matt Boylan. These were kind of the top three guys out there at first. Now there's a bunch of others out there, but then they start throwing stuff at each other.
I saw all that happen.
Yeah, you're a shill, you're this, you must be an Illuminati plant, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh. I got a voicemail somebody sent me, because I've realized that if you really want to see somebody get in touch with their inner psycho, all you have to do is mention that you're looking at this.
Right.
They will go completely insane right in front of you. It's truly incredible. And I've had no shortage of emails and Facebook messages and phone calls.
Right.
Somebody's like, I must be a paid Illuminati shill or whatever. And I'm thinking, man, I didn't get my checks. I
know. I'm still waiting for mine too.
If it's direct deposit, somebody messed up.
We're on the same payroll as Beyonce and Jay-Z. We got to have our checks coming sooner or later.
I guess we're just too low on the totem pole to really see anything. But, it is one of those issues. I've personally backed away from it just because I saw so much dissension, and I felt bad for you, Rob, because I saw all this stuff happen to you, and I don't think that was fair from all the angles, the different people attacking you and all this stuff. But it does speak into this idea that it's really interesting for Christians. For me, I started to think like, what if this whole thing is kind of fabricated in a way to pin Christians down into this idea of like, oh, if you don't believe the flat earth, then you're not a Christian or you're not a Bible believer. And that's what I started hearing, just in my YouTube channel and all this stuff, if I talk about stuff that's reported about space, they'll be like, well, it's all fake, and you're a shill because you don't believe the Bible and all this stuff. How have you dealt with that? I know you've dealt with a lot of that stuff, but what's been kind of your stance? Because I know you haven't really landed hard on like the earth is flat. You're more agnostic is what I heard you say last time. So
yeah, I've actually, as far as I know, I coined this phrase, but I've now taken to calling myself a zetetic agnostic. Because, agnostic, most people hear agnostic and they think, you don't really know if you believe in God or whatever. Obviously, anybody's followed me, they know I believe in God. But as it pertains to this subject, zetetic is like proceeding with from a position of inquiry and investigation, observation. And, agnostic, I can't even really say I'm a globalist anymore. And that word has taken on a whole new meaning for me, too.
Right.
But there are things about the globe that just don't work. It does not make sense when you look at the Chicago skyline, for one thing, from 60 miles away. And Mirage, I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy it. I don't buy it. I've talked to people who live there near the area where that picture was taken, and they're like, "No, we've all seen it at all times of the year." And for Mirage, that weatherman was saying, "Well, the temperature is just right with the cold water and the warm air." Well, what do you do in the wintertime when it's both cold? And they can see it even more clearly. There's a lot of things that aren't really working for me on the globe, but there's also, to be fair, quite a number of things that don't work for me on the flat earth model either. So I don't know where I am with it. Zetetic agnostic's about the only thing that works for me. But Zach Bauer, I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's got a ministry called New to Torah.
Sure.
And he posted a video, 2 videos recently, from taking a biblical stance against the flat Earth and saying, the Bible doesn't talk about flat Earth. And I'm like, dude, I don't know how you can get that from the scriptures, that it's a spinning heliocentric ball. It's not there. And I've got a page, one of the longer blogs that I wrote. In fact, I had to create a whole website called testingtheglobe.com because there's so much content that I kept putting up there. And one's called The Bible and the Still Flat Earth. And I put it just scriptures in one section. All the scriptures that I could find. Is probably not exhaustive, but as many as I could find. And I'm like, look, I'm not even going to tell you anything. You just read it for yourself and tell me if you get a spinning heliocentric ball out of it. And it's not there. So, and what really messed me up, and especially from some of these Torah people out there, is, it's all, if it's not in the Torah, I'm like, look, Genesis is in the Torah. It's not an Illuminati psyop. If it is a psyop, it started with God. Because in Genesis chapter 1, and this is what really tripped me up, is when it describes the firmament on day 4, not the firmament, but the sun, moon, and stars on day 4, it says that they were placed in the firmament, not outside and around. And I used to teach the canopy theory that Kent Hovind and Carl Baugh and a lot of others talk about, a canopy of ice surrounding the earth. As recently as this past December, I taught it. But then if you go back and read Genesis 1, on day 4, it says he put the sun, moon, and stars in. And the Hebrew word for firmament is rakia, but there's a bait, the letter bait, in front of it. And whenever you use the letter bait in front of a word as a prefix, it means in. So... and if you look up rakia, it's a beaten down metallic structure that's mirror-like, and God's throne's on top of it, etc. That's where you get the idea of the dome.
Right.
So that stuff's in the dome. And so, to answer your question, when people post all this stuff about space, I'm highly skeptical of anything that comes from NASA or any other space agency that's funded by a government.
Right. And I think that might be the main sort of through line with all the flat Earth stuff is, you basically, the argument starts with how much do you trust the government, how much do you trust NASA, and then it all can spiral out from there. Well, that's really interesting, Rob, and it's actually great to talk to you about this because, like we said, we haven't talked to you in a while, and you've been up to some stuff, and now we find out that it's at least partially our fault.
It's squirrel on your shoulder.
Well, I didn't want to take all the credit, but if you're giving it. All right, thanks, Rob. We got to talk. We'll catch up later, buddy.
Later, Rob.
Think outside the cage.
So both Rob and Russ will definitely be missed by us and, of course, a whole community of Canarians out there who Rob and Russ were big parts of building foundational knowledge and continuing the work of not just exposing the works of darkness, but also spreading the knowledge of the forces and the principalities and powers that have some impact on the world today. And so we've been very blessed for the opportunity to have spoken with both of them, even meet them in person. And really, if it weren't for both of them, it would be a very different world for you and I, Gons, both in just the genre that we deal with, and also just the knowledge that they helped lay down that is so foundational to what we do on Canary Cry News Talk now. I know that listeners of the podcast, both podcasts, Canary Cry Radio and Canary Cry News Talk, also are very thankful for Russ and Rob, and we are all keeping their families in prayer. We've had actually a few messages come in, people asking how they can support their families. And we know that at least one way you can do that is by seeking out and purchasing their work, their books, their legacies that they left behind. You can do that simply by going to their websites. We'll put the links in the show notes. And yes, Gons, you have any last words to say about our good friends?
Well, they're leaving a legacy behind that we get to sort of carry forward the knowledge and present it to the next generation and the next generation, and have that conversation that is weird but also explains a lot. And that's, to me, more important or more impactful than just the research is the communities that they created, both Rob and Russ. They were out there, they did other people's shows, they made friendships, they worked so hard. I mean, it was dedication to the evangelism in a way that modeled for us how we can do it, and through media and everything else. And yeah, they will be missed. They will be missed.
Indeed. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this very special episode of Canary Cry News Talk, The Shoulders of Giants, remembering Russ Dizdar and Rob Skiba. We'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming on Monday, October 25th, so make sure to tune in then. And thank you to everybody who has continued to support the show. We are not doing a producer segment on this episode. We just like to have it stand alone, but we will be thanking all producers on Monday's show. So make sure to tune back in. Gans, you have any last words?
So you have sorrow now, but I will see you again. Then you will rejoice, and no one can rob you of that joy. It's John 16:22. We're going to see those fellas again.
Well, there you go, folks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Canary Cry News Talk, and make sure to tune in next